Hello, everybody. Welcome. As you're starting to come in, please feel free to use the chat and introduce yourself. Say hi to everyone. We'll have the Q&A for people to ask questions as we go, and we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you here, and we're happy to have you join us. I'm Tanya Means, and I am the founder and principal of Inspire Higher Ed. And I have the privilege today of moderating today's conversation on a question that I think a lot of people are really considering right now. At the center of education is the conversation around, does AI actually help students to learn? And when does it maybe do some things that might be hurtful to them, and do the learning for them, if we can call it learning? So we'll give just another minute for people as they start to join in. We'll encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat, and we'll just give one more minute for a couple more people to join us, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. All right, I think we'll go ahead and start now. So you may have heard of this phrase of cognitive offloading. It gets used in a lot of different ways. And for our purposes today, we're going to treat it as the choice to let an external tool, in this case, generative AI, carry the mental work that the students would otherwise be doing for themselves. And so sometimes that is exactly what we need and what good learning design calls for, taking some of the load off of the students so that they can focus on something that is more meaningful or more impactful for them to do. But sometimes we find that that actually short circuits the learning process, taking away the productive struggle of learning and making the learning less sticky for the learner. And so understanding the differences between those two situations, that's what we're here to talk about. And it's really a little bit more complex and nuanced than it sounds. I am really happy today to be joined by four panelists who all think about this from different vantage points. And I want to introduce them very quickly now. So Michelle Kassorla brings the classroom view. He is an English professor at Georgia State University and has been redesigning her writing courses around AI since well before most of the field caught up. So welcome, Michelle.
Glad to be here. Really honored.
Thank you. Adam Pryor brings the cross-institutional view. As senior advisor at the Council of Independent Colleges, he sees patterns across hundreds of campuses, particularly in the liberal arts, and he'll bring that perspective to us. So welcome, Adam.
Glad to be here.
And Carlos Morales brings the scale and access view. As president of Lone Star College Online, he leads one of the largest online operations in the country, serving students whose backgrounds and preparation vary enormously. Welcome, Carlos.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
And Ray Clemens brings the product and design view. As chief customer officer at Chiron Learning, she works with institutions on AI that is built specifically for instructional use rather than retrofitted from general purpose tools. Welcome, Ray.
Thanks, Tanya. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop the screen share here and jump right into the conversation. I want to start with all four of our panelists here. If you would, if I could ask you the same question, and then we'll move into some more specific territory for each of you. So to kick us off, where in your work have you seen AI clearly helping students think more deeply, and where does it seem to be doing the thinking for them? Let's start with Ray.
Oh, wow. Okay. I wasn't expecting to start. I'm seeing a lot of really heartening things coming from educators really thinking strategically about how and where to apply AI. And I think I'm going to hear Carlos and Michelle talk more specifically about the classroom examples. So What I'd actually like to talk about is just where I'm seeing it, like those conversations be most productive. And what I see as being most effective as both somebody who sits on the product side, but also as a former higher ed CIO. So I spent many years thinking about technology adoption in higher ed, is faculty and educators who are thinking about this not as sort of tech for tech's sake or as a shiny object, or taking an existing process and kind of just slapping AI on top of it, but really thinking very specifically and intentionally about the technology that's aligned to the outcome that they're trying to achieve. And so whether that is engagement, whether that is, a specific learning objective, whether that's an instructional strategy and how do they align to their instructional strategies, really working backwards from what am I trying to achieve here, and then designing with that intentionality, I see as the places where it shows up really effectively. And the places maybe where it doesn't, when we just kind of go, well, I'm just going to do this for AI's sake. So that would be my answer.
Ray, I love that. And I really appreciate it. The reason why I went to you first is because you're actually having to think about how to translate this into a product and then
Yeah.
being able to take that translation and apply it in a variety of different institutions. And so next, I'd love to jump to Carlos and say, you are applying this in your institution. How have you been thinking about it?
Yes, we have been thinking about it as a tool that helps both, right? But helps the faculty member create content, explore different ways of delivering that content as well. On the student side, certainly assist them with learning the content, understanding, practicing the content as well. So the iterative, I'm sorry, part of the teaching side and the learning side, that's a way in which we are seeing that happening, on the teaching side of things for the most part.
Thanks, Carlos. I love that because you're really looking at how that impacts online learning across a really large institution. Now I'd like to turn it over to Adam and ask you, how are you seeing it in a variety of different institutions?
So I would say that I think the thing that has stood out the most to me is really looking at the interaction patterns that various institutions are trying to foster, right? I think anyone who's been sort of playing in this space knows that cognitive offloading can have you can do the exact same thing for two students, and for one it'll be cognitive offloading, and for another it won't, right? And that has to do with this sort of like question of habit. So maybe I won't really tell you much about institutions today. I'll just be an old philosopher who was like exiled from the classroom for a little while to talk about it. But I think that's mostly what I've seen is people wrestling with when we know it's that complex, how do we start establishing patterns that really work for as many students as we can figure?
Thank you, Adam. Michelle, as an individual instructor, what are you seeing?
Well, I am very carefully designing my courses so this doesn't happen. Of course, you're always going to get one or two kids who are going to cheat, usually because they're desperate. But the way that I've designed my courses is to prevent desperation by creating, first of all, I have a bunch of scaffolded lessons, and I'm not saying I'm scaffolding a skill, I'm saying I'm scaffolding the lesson. So if they have a paper that's due, I have like 2 weeks up to that paper where they're building all the parts of the paper, and then they just put them together when they get to the part where they're supposed to turn in the paper. And all of those are graded at the same level. So I have my essays, my quizzes, my discussion posts, they're all exactly the same level of grading. So instead of having some big summative assessment at the end, I'm grading process. So I found that that's very effective. The place that I find my students using AI inappropriately would be usually in a discussion post. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because I have not, and I put this on myself, I have not found an effective way to use discussion posts so that they feel like they're worth something. And if something isn't worth something, if it isn't adding to their learning or helping to scaffold that final lesson, the students are less likely to engage with it and more likely to cognitively offload. So when I see it, I say to myself, this is a design problem and this is a me problem more than it's a student problem.
I really appreciate that perspective on the intentional design of the learning experience. What kind of signals do you get from students to let you know that they're using AI to think alongside the material? So as a partner, as opposed to just completely skipping the thinking part.
Well, I design it in. So I have assignments that absolutely require that they use AI. For example, in my literature class last semester, I wanted to improve reading. And Notebook LM is really good as a reading AI tool. So I had them create all of their own notebooks, for example. And then they had to send me screenshots of their notebooks to make sure that they had uploaded stories that I had assigned into the notebook. And then I would have them do particular lessons. I want you to make a data table of this. And then I want you to look at the data table. I want you to find something that you think stands out. And then I want you to do this with it. So all the way through that, I was building AI into it. In my composition courses, for example, I have a Socratic tutor and I make them put in the prompt into the AI. I don't want to hide it behind a bot. I want them to know what the prompt says. Then I tell them very explicitly, you are responsible for keeping the AI on track because it's going to try to go off and it's going to try to do things you told it not to do. It's only supposed to ask questions. It's not supposed to give you examples. So I want you to make sure that you pay attention to keeping that AI on track. And then what I do is I read all of their chat logs. They have to turn in the chat log, and I'm reading the chat log. I'm not really reading the original and revised, and I'm reading the chat log. So, and I'm looking for intentional and ethical use of AI.
I really appreciate how you talk about what your workload is as opposed to what you're having the students do and considering both of them in a way to say, like, for example, you're saying you're not necessarily reviewing the product, you're more looking at what was their thought process as they were getting to that product. I appreciate that.
I just want, can I jump in really quick?
Of course.
One of the things that makes this tool or work interesting is that, for the longest time we have been in conversations with people and, I hope I know what you are thinking type of situation, when you have a colleague. So now with AI, technically, you know what your students are thinking, right? Because as Michelle said, when you request the chat logs, you see that interaction, right? And I'm asking, and I am, understanding, and can you refine? Can you tell me more? Okay, what about this? What about that? So you can actually see maybe for the first time how people may be thinking. Just wanted to add that perspective.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Carlos, and especially considering the indicators that you see in that chat log that tell you that the students are asking important questions, that they're carrying the conversation further, they're iterating through the process. I really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So Adam, go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to add to what Carlos said really quickly and say that, yeah, it's teaching agency, teaching our students to ask questions and teaching them to probe. And this is a skill that we have not really been teaching up to this point. And I think that AI is making this skill extremely important.
I think that's really a valid point. Yeah. So Adam, I want to zoom out just a little bit. And I know you said you'd prefer to be the
I will do whatever you ask.
philosopher on this side.
I'm very compliant.
Yeah.
I wasn't
But
taught agency.
Okay.
But I do have
Aren't
a
you in the
question.
liberal arts?
Yeah. Yeah, I do have a question actually specifically about liberal arts institutions. I think that one of the things that's really strong about a liberal arts institution is that philosophy and that teaching thinking and that kind of thing, where you're really trying to cultivate discernment, the ability to ask better questions, to weigh the context, to recognize nuance, to reason ethically, interpret complexity, all of those kinds of things, and communicate it with care. So how do you take what is really kind of native to that kind of educational experience and pair it with the strengths of AI in a situation where maybe that's not the content that they're teaching?
So alas, something happened. I lost the back end of that question, but I'm going to go with it. We'll get ourselves. Oh, look, see, now you're back. Okay. Um, I had a speaker kick in there for a second. So what I would say is when you're thinking about the liberal arts, a big piece of this is that classic sort of sense of human reasoning, right? And there's a little bit of me that wants to say, look, AI showed up. It's not like human reasoning changed overnight. The means by which we want to talk about how you do the human reasoning, okay, that may have changed, but the nature of human reasoning itself, look, that's still there. And AI doesn't do that. It can't do that. And I think that's an interesting piece to sort of start with in terms of helping turn the temperature down a little bit. When I think about the liberal arts place, this is maybe not the way I think we think of them as sort of hotbeds of a particular kind of sort of teaching. And I would say actually this is a moment where they can really help foster a conversation around saying, stop panicking. The sky is not falling because of AI. If you want to talk about why the sky is falling, it's probably because you weren't, as Michelle was saying, teaching agency for the past 100 years. And I'm always happy to talk about like why that's a problem. But I think when we look at the institutions that are sort of being successful with that, they are working to create um, i- almost like learning communities within their institutions of how it is that as a team we can approach using these tools. Um, and if I go one more thing, it's that they're these tools, not AI, right? This recognition or sort of sense that the AI is not one thing. You would not use the same tool to do your Christmas shopping as teach chemistry, is really important, but not in the general public, in my opinion.
So there's a great question that came up in the Q&A just now about what we mean by when we say student agency. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I'll go because my microphone is already on. When I talk about student agency, I am really thinking about the ability of a student to make particular kinds of choices about how they engage with the pedagogical setting that they find themselves in. So I'm thinking of agency as the ability of the student to participate in forming a particular kind of relationship.
And
So we've
if I
heard a
may,
lot about the idea of teaching how to think and not necessarily what to think. Carlos, what are you thinking about that?
sure. And I was just going to dovetail on the comment too. Um, it also provides for the venue or the avenue, if you will, for students to learn what they want to learn. And I say that with the utmost respect for everybody, right? But in these days, students have curiosity, right? And courses are rigid and syllabi is rigid and those type of things. But how much more space is available for my own learning and personalized learning? That I think that fits the definition of student agency as well.
I really appreciate that perspective. And I wonder if you could actually dig into that a little bit further when you talk about, especially for you, the scale and breadth of your learners' backgrounds that are coming to you and asking for an educational experience. When you think about AI and generative AI and the mechanisms that it allows for personalization, for customization, how is that also helping to accelerate access to deeper learning? And where is it at a risk that it might be widening gaps by giving students maybe some expectations that they can't afford?
Sure. The element is the on demand, right? I mean, you have an opportunity here for the on demand, but as I said, what I want to learn, okay, the tool allow for the customization of the learning in terms of how you construct courses and maybe how you construct your sequence of that content, right? And when you provide that to the students, right there, you are fulfilling that element of the agency. Actually, in both ways, the faculty member has always had the agency, but I think has widened at this moment, right? When for example, so if I know this is online, but we may just go for a second to face, here is the syllabi, here are all the things, right? And what are your expectations? I mean, that would be something different to ask, okay, in an upper level class, right? Or an honors class, those type of things. So you have that the element of trying to personalize and pace the learning is also very, very useful and very visible with these tools. And now again, with the way we are designing a course, certainly gaps, if you will, is on not changing the paradigm of teaching, right? Staying in your usual writing intensive transfer of knowledge, transfer of information vis-a-vis application, okay? And perhaps what I'm saying is not necessarily new, is that we are being asked to do this in a new and different way because of the circumstances, right? So those could be some gaps there. To what extent grade or credential inflation, maybe another gap, if you will, simply because the learning is occurring in a different way.
I think it's really interesting at this point to consider the idea that student agency can be around not wanting to use some of these tools as well. But how do we ensure that the same learning outcomes that we're trying to accomplish across all students can both, and this is kind of a two-part question, can both allow for that customization? Say, for example, I want to learn a content area in something that's interesting to me, like for maybe I know a lot about sports, or I know a lot about cooking, or I know a lot about animals and biology. If I want to learn this concept kind of seated in those areas that I'm most interested in, I'm going to be more curious about it. I'm going to be more interested, and therefore my agency to choose what world or context I place this learning in can really benefit me. But then if I maybe don't feel like AI is the tool that I want to use to learn it, how do we support that kind of agency at the same time?
You want me to address that one?
You can start, and then if anybody else has some thoughts, that'd be great.
Sure. I think again, this is like many other cycles from the past. Maybe it's a little more intensive cycle. The cell phone, the computer, the calculator, those type of things, right? And I am not oversimplifying. It's simply that we have adapted. The element here is that some of us have provided that agency in the past when we provide, here is an assessment, okay, that that we need to do, right? And we provide maybe a paper or an oral talk or an oral report, those type of things, and the student is fulfilling the same learning outcomes, but in a way that he or she is more comfortable. So some of that can be extrapolated, if you will, to the era in which we are, where the student may want to use it or not, right? It's simply a thought partner, is a tool, is a or not. Simply, I want to go line by line and do my thing, right? And spend the hours minute by minute versus the accelerated way, if you will, or versus the iterative way with a computer.
May I jump in though?
Please do, Ray.
I think it's a really interesting question, right? So one of the things that we think about is just in terms of AI supported learning is how do you personalize that experience? So it's the same ultimate learning objective, but my examples are going to be, politically oriented because I care a lot about politics, and yours are going to be healthcare oriented because you care a lot about healthcare, so you contextualize the information. But this idea about agency to not use a tool, in an era, so I was in higher education for 18 years, and then I went to Amazon, and then now I'm at Chiron. And companies like Amazon, like it's not a choice. You show up every day and you're being asked, how are you going to use AI to 10x yourself? And so I do think there's a level of that we have to figure out and grapple with, which is just you're going to be asked to use this, but your agency is figuring out how and where it shows up in the places that best support you and make you most productive, successful, whatever those end outcomes are as a student, as an employee, as a human being. And maybe that's I don't know that the agency is to not to opt out. Like I don't actually know that we have that choice anymore in today's society. And so I mean I do think that's something that we have to grapple with as well, is like this is the world that our students are being asked to land in, and how do we give them agency at the same time that we understand that some of these things are just the realities of today's world as well.
Michelle, I'd be really interested to
Yeah,
hear how you're facing this in your classroom.
I'm not, because I'm very draconian about it. And I'm gonna I'm gonna go right off on what Ray said. Look, as a college professor, I know what my students need to learn. Okay, they don't get to decide what they need to learn. I determine those objectives. If I think that they need to use computers in 1990, then they better learn how to use computers in 1990. If I wanted to use a specific textbook for my class, they're going to use that textbook for my class, or they're not going to pass my class. My class is based on AI. I have determined that my students need to know AI in order to get through my class and also to be successful in college. So it's not a choice. That's not agency. That's opting out. And the only way I think it would be okay to allow that type of agency is if my student first proved to me that they had complete control and understanding of AI and could do everything that they needed to do. Then they can make that choice, because they haven't developed that agency if they're just opting out. And so they cannot make that decision. And I'm sorry, but I tell my students, you have to use AI in my class. And I send out, just because I'm trying to be politically correct, but it's really not what I think. But I do send them out a letter. Like I've just sent out letters to all the people signed up for my class, okay? For the fall semester and for the summer semester. I sent them all an email. And I said, you've signed up for my class. I want to make sure that you know that I use AI in my class and that it's required. It's not an option. So if you're signed into my class, I want you to be quite aware of this. And if you're not comfortable with it, you have time right now to go find another class, because this is not the class for you. And I've yet to have any students drop out. And the reason why is I'm a very popular instructor. And one of the reasons I'm a popular instructor, I think, is because I have determined what I think are important skills for the workforce. And I've made it clear to my students why.
Adam, we kind of started this because you were saying something. Do you want to kind of bring it all
Sure.
together? Do you have some thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I would have ended up in the same draconian space that Michelle is in, right? Like, there's just no question in my mind that that's where this goes. Um, the interesting piece to me is after that, right? When we get past the moment where Michelle needs to send out a letter to say, my class uses AI, because the common assumption is there are classes that don't,
Mhm.
right? When we get past that moment, how do we address the fear that's driving that assessment, right? That's the real human stake of the question, in my opinion. And I think that's the place that I look at and go, like, if we can't have that conversation in colleges and universities, we are doomed. So if you are a professor and you are uncomfortable with that conversation, I'm sorry, you chose the wrong field. Move on. Because that is where things are headed right now. And I think it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
Well,
I
and
know, I'm
that's
Debbie Downer. There you
no.
go.
I actually, one of the things that you were saying is the same time as you were saying it. The question that came into the Q&A was about. So I'll just read it. It seems like a lot of focus here is on students using AI tools. What would it look like to center student learning outcomes instead and design multiple routes to achieve those same outcomes? And that's kind of the perspective that I was taking when I was saying, I have students that have different interests, and I want to create the same learning outcome driven experience that is able to be couched in their particular interest area. how do we get more faculty to recognize that that's the opportunity? It's not necessarily, I mean, I know at this point we're having to say, I use AI, I don't use AI. These are the things that I think about, but it's more about how do we get people to focus on what was the original intent? What did you want to see students to do? And what is the delta that you recognize between when a student walks in your door for the first time, whether that's online or in person, and when they walk out the last time? How have they changed? And so that's the piece that I think we need to spend more time focusing on. And I'm wondering if any of you have had those conversations with faculty to help them to understand that that's where we help or hurt students, is by saying we're trying to get this learning outcome accomplished.
I don't think you can have that discussion with someone who's really angry and scared. And I have decided I'm not going to have that discussion. So when somebody says I'm not going to use AI in my class, I just say, okay. But then I sneak over to their office when they're working on something like trying to put their class together for next semester. And I say, hey, I work with a lot of rubrics. Do you use your rubrics? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, AI can really help you make these rubrics. I know you don't want to introduce it to your class. I know you don't want to use it in class, but just try this. And I'll show them one or two things about stuff to use on the back end. And what I found is as soon as they've started using AI in the back end, then they start to think, because these are smart people, okay? And they start to think, what could I do with my students with this? And then they start to have that imagination. And I think that we have to be kind to people who are not ready to make that jump yet. I think I've always said that there's two ways to look at decision making. There's decision making made out of love, and there's decision making made out of hate or fear. And if you're making the decision out of love because you think it's the best thing for your students, then I'm not going to argue with you. But if you're making it out of hate or fear, then I think that we need to just step back and start to learn a little bit so that you're not so fearful.
Yeah, I appreciate that response. It looks like we've got another question here in the chat, or in the Q&A, about why is choosing tools other than AI to accomplish a particular goal classified as fear?
I'll swing at that one.
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I would say it's not. Right? Like there are lots of ways to get to a learning outcome. That's totally fine, right? I don't think that all means other than AI are fear. I will say, having done professional development for like over 180 campuses at this point, the prime motivating factor that I see, if we push on it hard enough, when someone says, I won't use AI, is fear. And I think that's the piece that I would say. But it's not to say that there aren't other ways out there. There are plenty of places where if I were in a classroom right now, I would absolutely forbid AI from touching anything. And places where I would say, you absolutely aren't allowed to do this without AI in order to create a sort of diversity of experience for the student. But that, I think I don't want to like throw the fear question out entirely as a result of that.
I just want to add something really quick. Certainly, the aspect that we also need to consider is, this tool came without a user's manual, right? It was unleashed, okay, and go at it, right? And what's happening, and I'm going to use Michelle as an example, if you will, right? You have an ecosystem where a number of faculty members are modeling the use of the tool and leveraging the use of the tool, okay, for their students, right? And we can go as far as equipping the student, right, with X, Y, and Z skill, right? And then on the other side of the coin, if you will, where and when the tool is not used, the question that I always ask is, what are you supposed to do with what you know? So again, on face-to-face, your class at 9 a.m., there is modeling and usage and embracement and all that, and your class at 1 p.m. doesn't do that. what do you do with those skills? I mean, you come to college to widen and learn and all those things. So I know that maybe I'm opening a Pandora's box right there, okay, or a hornet's nest, depending what you want to choose, right? But that modeling is important, and I don't think it's fear. There may be some of that, okay, but it's like everything, what's your source to allay that fear and maybe correct the knowledge on how to use the tool.
Ray, one of the things when you're designing those AI tools for instructional use,
Yeah.
I'm imagining that you're probably making some choices about how to keep the cognitive work with the students.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like in practice? How are you making those design choices in the platform?
Yeah, so we really think about designing experiences where learners still have to think and decide and explain and reflect and do all the things that constitute good learning, and baking those into the technology. And so that looks like, asking learners to explain their reasoning before they receive feedback. It looks like using scenarios and application-based activities so that instead of just recall-based questions, right? So they have to apply what they've learned. It looks like designing interactions that surface misconceptions and then, building kind of revision loops into that thinking so that learners can rethink or improve their answers. And then using AI to scaffold learning. So like I like to say that AI is super new, but like learning isn't. We have decades of research about how people learn and what constitutes good learning design. And Carlos said this earlier, right? He said it's not new. We're just doing it in a different way. And so we really lean on that and we think about, the ICAP framework and how do we ensure that we're driving deep cognitive engagement in these interactions that we're providing. And we use constructivist learning theory so that we think about how do we scaffold that learning. And Michelle talked about scaffolding. So not scaffolding the lesson, but actually scaffolding questions and making sure that we're supporting learners along the way throughout that process. So it's really important to us that we support you and we support your students in actually that learning piece of it, and not just that sort of, I call it like a call and response sort of back and forth that happens with so much of the AI that we're seeing today.
Thank you, Ray. We do have another interesting question in the Q&A. I wanted to go ahead and review that. So it says, are there certain foundational skills that you think students should develop without AI assistance before being permitted to use it, similar to how we require students to learn basic math skills by hand before allowing calculators? And so if we're thinking about what kinds of things should we separate out from the AI practice versus the things that we do find beneficial to use AI for, how do we make those decisions? And maybe Michelle and Adam, you can talk just a little bit about that from your perspectives.
Well, I think if somebody is learning their times tables in college, then probably it's a problem. Okay. So by the time they get to me, they better have some understanding of what a paragraph looks like, what an essay looks like. They're in college. Okay. Now, I teach at an urban community college that is heavily filled with ESL. We're a minority serving institution, Hispanic serving institution, primarily Black institution. I have a very diverse student body. So what I see is not that my students don't know how to do that or that somebody hasn't tried to give them those practical skills, but that they don't really know what to do with them, and they've never had the opportunity. So what happens is, for example, my English as a second language people, they're brilliant. All right. They're freaking brilliant. I could not take college in another country in another language. What? Okay, so they have incredible thoughts in their head. I want to unlock them. Why can't I unlock them with AI? Why can't I have them write something in their original language and then transform it with AI into a beautiful semantic sentences and communicate what those ideas are? There is nothing wrong with that. So I have to, and if somebody has never, I had one student, this is so important. I had a student tell me, that he is not a good writer. He's never been a good writer. He's disabled. He has a really bad learning disability. Okay. She says every semester in every class, all the way through college, I mean, all the way through high school, all the way through middle school, I had to write the same thing. Let's learn how to write a paragraph. Let's learn how to write a paragraph. He said, in your class, you said there's 3 ways to write. And this is what I tell my students. You can write first, okay, which is you're a good writer or you enjoy writing and you've always written well, and then have AI, go through it and help you to polish it. All right. The second way is to do AI first, which a lot of these students do. I say start with AI. Okay. Then I want you to use AI, what AI wrote, as a skeleton. Okay, I want you to write over it with your own voice, your own ideas, your own knowledge. You're only using it as a guidepost so that you can move forward. Okay, and usually about the second paragraph after that, they've left what AI wrote behind and they're going off on their own. It's because they didn't know what an essay looked like. They didn't know what I was expecting. The third way is to go back and forth between those, to write something, to iterate with AI, to go back, to change it, and that is that's where I want my students. I want them fluently using AI as a co-thinker, and for them to be getting as much as they can out of working with AI. And that's where I'm unlocking a lot of students who've never had the capability of doing deep research. Now, what we're doing in my Composition 2 class is heavily researching one topic throughout the entire semester. And my students who are ESL or who've never written anything, they're able to really go in and do this kind of research and really be proud of what they did. And they are overwhelmed by it. I mean, I've had them in tears because I have communicated to you what I've always thought about this topic. And AI helped me a little bit, but it was really my thoughts. And I'm like, I believe you, you know, let's let's go with that. It's wonderful. And I'm getting really creative, really wonderful stuff that's heavily researched. They've carefully done it, and I've taught them how to use the tools to do that. And that there's just nothing better than that.
Adam, what's your experience been with that?
Yeah, two things. One is I think this is the place where I actually think you're going to start to see a kind of redistinctioning. We'll just invent words today. A sort of like redistinctioning of colleges and universities, right? If for the past 20, 30 years, they've all kind of collapsed into they're the same thing. It's just about cost. Decide where you want to go. I actually think this provides a real opportunity to create some distinctiveness. This institution thinks of this way. It's a fundamental transformative technology. They're using it this way. This one thinks of it this way, right? A liberal arts college probably isn't going to get at this the same way that Michelle's going to get at it at Georgia State. And that actually is a good thing in the long run. I think in the short run, that's going to be really painful. Um, the second piece of that is to say, to me, the question of those are there fundamental foundational skills that need to be done without AI really depends on the field, right? So when Michelle's talking about writing, yeah, I would probably go in a very similar direction. If I'm talking about, a fundamental science lab, there are probably some things where I'm like, I want you to learn pipetting. And I don't necessarily need your AI to do that with you. Are there ways that AI might help me develop foundational skills? Yes. And that I think becomes this sort of interesting mix of things, which goes back to that piece of I have a feeling different colleges and universities are going to start doing this in really different ways. And leaning into that diversity as a strength for how we get at doing things.
Tanya, can I edit something to
Yeah,
this too?
Ray, I was just going to turn it to you and ask you
Oh.
what you're seeing institutions that are, given what Adam and Michelle are talking about, where are institutions maybe getting it wrong by not helping people to realize this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of layers to that I'd like to. So leaning on what they said, and actually embedded in that question is this idea that it's students use AI and maybe there's foundational skills that sort of are aside from that. And I actually think there's kind of three ways to think. I mean, there's multiple ways to think about AI, but here do students understand AI as content? So it's like your curricula. Do students use AI in the work that they produce, right? So that's sort of how are they interacting? Are we asking them to put their first draft through AI, that sort of thing? And then there's sort of the AI that supports the actual process of teaching and learning. So which is more of what we do. So, you could use AI, and we actually see institutions doing this quite frequently, to support that foundational skill development where maybe it's lacking or gaps in students' knowledge to help them be more successful than to do other things and then apply it in their work and then whatever. So it's actually sort of there's embedded in that question is sort of saying that there's only one kind of way AI shows up, and really it shows up in different places. And I would say that that's kind of fun. So to then now answer your question, I would say that's fundamentally the thing that I see either working effectively or not, is when institutions, really think about AI as all the same thing, because it is not all the same thing. And particularly, and Adam said this earlier, right? He said it's not all the same. And Michelle talked about sort of intentionality and discernment. And so I would say, intentionality and discernment when it comes to teaching and learning, what I see, unfortunately, not doing super well is when institutions say, I bought institution site license for whichever platform of choice or embedded in platform, and taking that general purpose AI tool and then trying to use that to support academics and saying this is an academic support. And I'll give you like kind of two really specific examples. One is the chatbot. Chatbot is fantastic for certain things. So love chatbots, use them all day, every day. But they rely on somebody to ask them the question. And students who don't understand something don't know what question to ask. They don't know where their gaps in knowledge are. So that's not super productive. And usually when we ask the chatbot, we're looking for an answer, not learning. And then the second way is assuming, and I know you talked about this, Michelle, so respect to you. I'm going to have a slightly different perspective on Socratic tutors, but assuming that because an AI can do Socratic questioning, that's really supporting learning. And what we see is, in fact, well, you all know this, you're all faculty members. Teaching isn't just about asking questions. It's about guiding your student along a journey that the end point to, and they don't, and helping them get there. And chatbots don't inherently have that sort of instructional strategy or that destination, baked in. Even Socratic questioning, it can ask questions, but it's not leading you down a path. And secondly, it's not generating that durable knowledge. So durable knowledge or understanding comes from, sort of retrieving the information, explaining it, applying it, using it in new scenarios. And again, the Socratic questioning is not typically designed to have that level of retrieval and practice baked in. So, that's kind of, I would say, the bigger mistakes that we see is really saying, well, I'm going to slap this AI, which is built for this purpose, my Christmas shopping, onto my chemistry course. And miraculously, it's going to support my students to learn.
I have to chime in here and talk about the Socratic tutors that we create, because they're not general Socratic tutors. We have built Socratic, and I say we because it's Eugenia Novokshchanova who helped me develop these courses, and she's a brilliant, brilliant person. So the Socratic tutors that we built for these classes specifically are based on one skill. So they work as a tutor. So, and I love that you brought this up, because yeah, you can't have a general Socratic tutor. If you're using a Socratic tutor, it really has to be focused on a goal. And our Socratic tutor is focused on, for example, writing an academic paragraph. So you're supposed to write the academic paragraph, okay? Then you submit it to the Socratic tutor, and then the Socratic tutor goes through and does topic sentence, source signaling, how you did, what evidence you used, whether it was appropriate, whether or not you cited it correctly, and whether or not you analyzed it. So these are the things that our students work with that Socratic tutor is very, very focused. Or in our English Composition 1 class, our Socratic tutor is on descriptive writing. So you give it a descriptive paragraph and then it asks you even deeper questions. So you said he was wearing jeans. What color jeans? Were they frayed or were they new? You know, like get more detailed about this detail. And so it focuses those students on the particular things that we're trying to focus on in that lesson. So when we're using a Socratic tutor, it's very, very, very focused. So I just wanted to clarify that.
No, and I think that's fantastic. That's exactly what I'm talking about, right? I think that's absolutely fantastic, right? Really built for purpose, really designed with the learning outcome in mind. And you talked about intentionality and discernment, right? Like exactly that. That's not, I see that in amazing use cases like yours. In other places, right? We don't see that as much. We see like, well, we have.
Yeah, and that's another reason why we don't use bots. We have them actually put the prompt in. First of all, we want them to know what the prompt says and how it works and how to write one. And then second thing is we want them to realize when the chatbot is not following the prompt so that they understand hallucination and they understand drift, because these are significantly important things for them to learn while they're working with AI, especially as beginners.
Yeah, fantastic.
Just wanted to add quickly, I think the element, and it has been mentioned, I guess, through the conversation to what extent we want and we need to focus on or move actually from a product-based to more process-based type of assessment, interactions, activities. Okay, because this goes back to the question of, you know, do you want the students to know certain things before they use AI, right? I mean, you need to know 2 + 2 how that yields 4, right? And before doing the calculator, right? So there is that element, and I mentioned before, you know, changing the paradigm of teaching, right? I mean, here is an opportunity, right? Not at once, little by little, because we are in different phases of that understanding for us to move away from the traditional assessment, okay, and move into a new type of a way of measuring student knowledge, right, and capturing student knowledge and the process to acquire the knowledge, to demonstrate the knowledge. Okay, I think the tool is very rich to support that, and is very rich to provide ideas on how that can be supported.
Excellent point. Thank you, Carlos. Well, we've had some really good questions in the Q&A that I've been bringing up as we've been going, and we've got a bunch more that are there that I would love to have time to answer, but we don't. So we'll follow up with some answers as we send out the recording. I would like to bring it all back now. Kara, if you want to turn on the screen share again, we've got a few things to wrap up. And just really appreciate having the opportunity here to moderate this panel. I am sure we could keep having this conversation for another couple of hours at least. But thank you so much for the conversation, for the things that we were able to talk about, and for your continuing questions that will hopefully carry on into further conversations in the future. So with that, Ray, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick message from your team.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and really huge thanks to you, Tanya, and to Adam, and to Carlos and Michelle. Really love the conversation. Would love to keep it going. Just for everybody, as I sort of mentioned, Chiron, you know, we're AI-powered instruction that's really intentionally built to support learning. And as I described, it's kind of that, like, how do we support the teaching and learning process, not as much sort of how do students bake it into their work product. But would love to have you check it out if you're at all interested. We're at chironlearning.com, or you can reach out to me directly. I'm Ray at chironlearning.com, so RAE. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ray. And just the last thing I'd like to mention is if you enjoyed this conversation and you'd like to have more conversations like this, if you're a higher ed leader and you're trying to figure out how to take what's happening in individual AI experimentation or the pockets of innovation that you have around your campus, and you want to build them more into an institutional strategy for your entire campus or for your unit or your department or your college, I'd encourage you to check out AI Convergence. It's an event that Inspire Higher Ed is going to be running in June, and we have some great partners at the University of Miami, at the Herbert School of Business. We are looking for people who are academic leaders, people who are ed tech leaders, who are industry professionals, being able to come together, because this format is really going to be a little bit unusual. When you typically go to a conference and you listen to people present, and then you take things home and you hope like heck that you can find some time to apply it. Whereas at this event, what we're focused on is having those conversations, and then along the way building an action plan that you can take home and apply in the next 30, 60, or 90 days to have an innovation that goes beyond just the conference itself, but into a real action that takes place at your campus. So the link is on the slide, aiconvergence.ai. We'd love to have you there if you're available to attend. And if you're not, then go ahead and sign up for future events, because we will have other events in the future. And all the travel information, the registration information is available on that site, and encourage you to check it out and follow up with me if you have additional questions. It's Tanya, TAWNYA, at inspirehighered.com. So thank you so much. We'll look forward to future opportunities to have these conversations. And thanks for attending, and a special thanks to our panelists and to Ray and Chiron Learning for hosting this webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.